So having children is a wonderful thing, and it's a time to be cherished when they're little like that. But everyone who has toddlers knows that things get a lot more difficult when those toddlers start to be able to talk, right? It's really great and adorable and such a relief when they're finally able to express themselves and start to articulate their feelings and their needs. But then come the questions. The endless, consistent questions all the time. They want to know everything. And sometimes as a parent, you'll say something to them and they'll repeat it back to you with a question mark just to make you say it again for some reason. All the time, it's questions. I remember coming home one time to my wife when my kids were about 4 and 2, and she looked frazzled and kind of exhausted. And I was like, "What's wrong?" And she said, "Do you have any idea how many questions I have answered today?" It's just exhausting. From these small children come tons of questions, and it can be a lot. There's a lot that children want to know. They're eager to learn, eager to participate, and eager sometimes just to be reassured as they grow. And that is a quality, I think, that doesn't entirely go away as we grow into adults. Because as we go through life, we have lots of questions, and that applies very much to our relationship with God. We want to know what God is doing. We want to know from God that we are reassured, that we can be affirmed. We often wonder what God is doing or if he is doing anything at all. We want to know if he's working and how. We want to be reassured that everything is going to be okay, that our God loves us, that he's working things out, that we have a future with him. We come to God much like toddlers with lots and lots of questions. And today, as we continue our series called Meant for Good, as we're getting close to completing the book of Genesis with the story of Joseph, we're going to consider some of the many questions that must have crossed Joseph's father Jacob's mind. Last week, as we studied Genesis 45 together, we saw Joseph finally revealing his identity to his brothers. And at long last, the family is mostly reconciled. And they begin to see how God was working even through their failures. Because they had sold Joseph into slavery and because God had raised Joseph up in Egypt, the family would be saved from this intense famine that was across the land. However, all of Joseph's family, including his father Jacob, were going to have to pack up and move to Egypt in order to live. And at the end of chapter 45 last week, we considered Jacob's feelings as he was waiting for his sons to return after sending them off. Remember, he had thought for many, many years that his son Joseph was dead. He probably thought that his son Simeon, who had been kept in prison in Egypt, was also dead. He probably also wondered for a long time if any of the other sons, including his beloved son Benjamin, would return to him. But then, as Jacob's sons returned home with many wagons full of things from Egypt and news of Joseph's survival, he was revived. It said last week in the passage that his spirit was revived. While he had questioned whether or not God had failed, suddenly Jacob was reassured God was doing something in this. He was very suddenly drawn back into the plan of God. And today, as the story continues, while Jacob may have some renewed confidence in God, that doesn't mean that there won't be more questions. And as the story plays out in Jacob's life, we're going to highlight some of the questions that we can kind of assume that Jacob had because we have those same kinds of questions ourselves. So look with me this morning, Genesis chapter 46, verses 1 to 4. It says, "So Israel took his journey with all that he had and came to Beersheba and offered sacrifices to the God of his father Isaac. And God spoke to Israel in visions of the night and said, 'Jacob, Jacob.' And he said, 'Here I am.' Then he said, 'I am God, the God of your father. Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, for there I will make you into a great nation. I myself will go down with you to Egypt, and I will also bring you up again. And Joseph's hand shall close your eyes.'" So Jacob and all of his people have packed up everything, their entire livelihood, as many belongings as they could load onto these wagons sent to them by Egypt, and they head towards Egypt to stay. Now, this gives them the opportunity to pass through a place called Beersheba. Now, you may remember from our study of Genesis in the long term, this place has come up several times before. It's fairly significant. This is where Hagar fled with Ishmael. It's also where Abraham made a covenant with a man named Abimelech. It's also where God spoke to Isaac, Jacob's father, and reassured Isaac of the covenant that he made with Abraham to make them a great people, a great nation. You may remember that Isaac built an altar there at Beersheba. Now, later on, after Jacob himself left Beersheba to flee from his brother Esau, you may remember that Jacob himself had laid down a stone and gone to sleep with his head resting on the stone and had his own vision from God near this place. So now, as Jacob returns to this place that's kind of filled with memories and heritage, he probably also was filled with questions. Even still, he makes a sacrifice to the Lord, just like his father had. And in this moment, God speaks to Jacob directly, almost as if to head off all the questions that he knows are weighing heavily on Jacob's heart. Now, look back at the verse. God says 5 main things to Jacob as he speaks to him. First, God identifies himself. He says, I am God, the one and only, the God of Jacob's father Isaac and his grandfather Abraham. The same God who spoke to them, had spoken to Jacob before, is now speaking to him. Secondly, God lovingly says, do not be afraid to go down to Egypt. That means that we know, God knows Jacob has questions. He knows Jacob is fearful and wondering how all this is going to go. But before the question is even uttered, God simply says, do not be afraid. Third, God reassures Jacob of the promise that he made decades before, the same promise that he made to his father Isaac and to his father Abraham before him. God says, I will make you into a great nation. So God reassures Jacob that the plan is still in place. The promise is still true. He hasn't failed. What God has said, he will do. And fourth, God says, I myself will go down with you to Egypt. So God basically reassures Jacob that he will not be alone in this. God is present with him. God himself is along for the ride here. And finally, God promises that Jacob's son Joseph will close his eyes, will lay him to rest. Remember, once again, Jacob spent 22 years thinking that his son Joseph was dead, that his family was torn apart, and that God's plans were basically wrecked. But he is going to see his son Joseph again. And Jacob then will die in peace with his family reunited, confident in the ongoing plan of God. So in this brief encounter, God is answering the questions that he knows are on Jacob's heart. Before the questions ever escape Jacob's lips, God answers, I am God. Don't be afraid. I will fulfill my promise. I will be present with you. You will have peace. And even though God has given his answers, we see as we continue through the description, the questions still lingering in Jacob's mind, the same questions that linger in our minds as well. Look with me at Genesis chapter 46, verses 5 to 7. It says, Then Jacob set out from Beersheba. The sons of Israel carried Jacob their father, their little ones, and their wives in the wagons that Pharaoh had sent to carry him. They also took their livestock and their goods, which they had gained in the land of Canaan, and came into Egypt. Jacob and all his offspring with him, his sons and his sons' sons with him, his daughters and his sons' daughters, all his offspring he brought with him into Egypt. Now think for just a moment about the inevitable culture shock that was happening here with Jacob. It was kind of like a Beverly Hillbillies moment. That's kind of how I imagine it. These country Canaan people have loaded up their wagons. I like to imagine Jacob sitting on a rocking chair strapped to the top of the wagon somewhere as they travel across into kind of the big city. Egypt is a much more developed place, a much more prosperous nation. It is very different from the land from whence they have come. Their wagons are loaded and they're rolling up into the big city, and it's drastically different. It's a different culture, a different land, a different society. It is foreign and it is very pagan. So we can imagine that it in no way feels like home to them. Plus, you'll remember God's promise that he just reassured Jacob of was not just about growing a numerous people. It was not just about being fruitful. Jacob had certainly been fruitful, as we'll read in just a second. God's promise, though, was about Jacob's people becoming a nation. And a nation is not just a people. It is a people with a place. Their promise from God came with this promise of a territory, a land. That is the land that they're leaving. So in some ways, they've got to feel this separation from this promise from God. God had promised us that we would live here. And now God says his promise is still true even though we're going here in this different place, this place that is not our home. How is Jacob supposed to believe that God is still going to make them a great nation when that nation has no place? So we can imagine that the one question on Jacob's heart is God present and working in this place? Egypt isn't home. This isn't where they're supposed to be. These people don't know them. They don't like them. They don't respect the Hebrews or their culture or their heritage or their God. How could God be with us here in Egypt? How could God make us a great nation while we are living in the shadow of a current great nation? And you may sometimes wonder the same sort of thing. Is God present and at work right where you are? Is God present and working here where we live in Parker, Colorado? Now, don't get me wrong, Colorado is a wonderful place to live. Parker is an amazing town. But you may get the feeling, as I often do, that this place doesn't want us here. There are things about our culture, about our local and state government that are antithetical to our beliefs as followers of Jesus. In addition to that, I have had, believe it or not, more than one person tell me Parker doesn't need any more churches. Parker doesn't want any more churches. We're good. We don't want you here. That is the message that I have received in this place that I love to live. So then I'm drawn to wonder, as you may sometimes be, is God present and at work here in this place? And in addition to feeling that way about the location where you live, some of you may feel that way about the place that you work. You may be in an environment that feels very hostile to your faith, very opposed to the gospel. And you may wonder sometimes, is God really present here? Is he working here? Is he in this place? But the place where they're going isn't the only concern for Jacob and his family as they make the journey into Egypt. There's another big issue that raises many questions for Jacob, and that issue is his own people. As the story continues, there's a little bit of a short detour in the text that gives a chronicle of all the people that are traveling with Jacob. And I put it on the screen because I don't particularly want to read it out loud. If you squint really hard, you can kind of see. But Genesis chapter 46, verses 8 through verse 27, basically just gives an account of all of Jacob's sons and his grandsons. Those are the people that are being counted here. And like I said, you can look up there and see, it's basically in the text, it's divided by the wife who bore the sons to Jacob and their grandsons. So first it goes through Leah, and then Bilhah, and then Rachel, and then Zilpah at the end. It gives all the account of all of these people. And basically it goes like this. There's a lot of people there listed by group. First, the sons and grandsons of Leah, total 33 people. Then those born to Jacob from Zilpah, 16 people. Then those born to Rachel, an additional 14 people. And then those born to Bilhah, an additional 7 people. And this listing is pretty interesting when you consider that these are the people who God is going to use to build his great and holy nation. The list includes, in verse 10, Simeon's son Shaul, born to a Canaanite woman. You may remember, relationships to Canaanite women were strictly forbidden. But here, we've got the child of a Canaanite woman along for the ride with them. The list also includes, in verse 12, among the sons of Judah, we see listed there the twins, Perez and Zerah. You may remember from back in Genesis chapter 38 that they were born to Judah from Tamar, his own daughter-in-law that he slept with kind of accidentally. So that's not great, right? The list also includes Joseph's sons, even though they didn't travel with them to Egypt. You'll remember that Joseph's wife, we were told back before, it says in verse 20, Joseph's wife's name was Asenath. She was the son of Potipharah, a pagan priest of Egypt. So she's a pagan woman that has borne Joseph children. That's not great either. All in all, even knowing what we know, which is not everything, there's a lot more about these people that we don't know, but knowing what we know, this is a motley crew of people. This is not the pure, unstained, pious people of God. These people are a mess. In fact, when we read this, it may remind you a little bit of your own family. You've been to a family reunion before. You've looked around the room and you've thought, what is wrong with some of these people, right? You may even think that this list is tame compared to the crazies in your own family. And yet here they are, the people of God, the ones whom God will make into a great nation. So again, we can easily imagine looking at his family that Jacob has got to be wondering. The next blank on your sheet is this. Is God present and working with these people? This is who we've got to work with? God's doing something with this bag of mixed nuts? And again, you may wonder the same thing at various times in your own life. You may look at your coworkers or your friend group or your family and think, how on earth is God going to accomplish anything with this messed up, unqualified group of people? I mean, if we're really honest, and I don't mean this in a mean way at all, we could ask the same question about our own church body. Looking at us and our own mistakes and our own lives and the skeletons that we have in our closet, like, I get it. How is God going to use this group of people to accomplish his will? Is God able to do something with us? Is God present here with us, really? Now, on a quick side note, some people do, when they read this passage of Genesis chapter 46, verses 8 to 27, they struggle a little bit with the math of it. Look with me at what it says in Genesis 46, verses 26 and 27. As it wraps up this genealogy section, it says, all the persons belonging to Jacob who came into Egypt were his own descendants, not including Jacob's sons' wives, were 66 persons in all. And the sons of Joseph who were born in Egypt were 2. All the persons of the house of Jacob who came into Egypt were 70. So what's 66 plus 2? Not 70, right? Yeah, exactly. So some people kind of struggle with the way that this is worded. It seems to just say, just counting the sons and grandsons, that there were 66 people. But there were more names than that on that list that we just didn't read, that we put onto the screens. It also then immediately says that there were 70 in Jacob's household. So why does the math not add up? Okay, here's the answer. You can see the math on the screens. It lists the sons and grandsons of Leah, 33, plus Zilpah, 16, plus Rachel, 14, plus Bilhah, plus 7. That equals 70. Then it also does list Dinah, which is Leah's daughter, making 71. She's counted in that list. It also does mention that 2 grandsons, and Onan, died. So that's minus 2. It also says that it's not counting Joseph and his 2 sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, so that's minus 5 total. That's where we get the number 66 from, okay? Then, when they get to Egypt, we suddenly then do count Joseph, Ephraim, and Manasseh. Oh, and we can't forget Jacob himself, who wasn't counted before, and that gives us a plus 4, which is 70. Does that make sense? The math is there. It just gets confusing sometimes. You stumble across this. There's usually an answer for this sort of thing, but that's kind of the answer for you with his genealogy. Now, with all the math squared away, let's return to the story. Look with me, Genesis 46, verses 28 to 33. It said, he had sent Judah ahead of him to Joseph to show the way before him in Goshen, and they came into the land of Goshen. Then Joseph prepared his chariot and went up to meet Israel, his father, in Goshen. He presented himself to him and fell on his neck and wept on his neck a good while. Israel said to Joseph, now let me die, since I have seen your face and know that you are still alive. And Joseph said to his brothers and to his father's household, I will go up and tell Pharaoh, and will say to him, my brothers and my father's household, who were in the land of Canaan, have come to me. And the men are shepherds, for they have been keepers of livestock, and they brought their flocks and their herds and all that they have. When Pharaoh calls you and says, what is your occupation? You shall say, your servants have been keepers of livestock from our youth. even until now, both we and our fathers, in order that you may dwell in the land of Goshen, for every shepherd is an abomination to the Egyptians. So Goshen is a territory kind of on the north side of Egypt. It's near the Nile. So even though there was a famine going on, the area near the river was probably still somewhat fertile, at least fertile enough to keep livestock alive. So that's where they are sent to live. Jacob's family could survive and even grow over time there in this place that is more commonly referred to in history as a place called Ramses. Now, there's a lot of nice things about this area. Plus, we saw the good news was that Jacob is finally reunited with his long-lost son, Joseph. Jacob hadn't seen Joseph since he was 17 years old, and now, 22 years later, they are together once more. And once again, we should note that Joseph starts crying. He's a weepy dude. This is like the 5th time that he has cried in the story. Now, there are some cons to this situation, however. As you can see from the text, people like them are typically not very well accepted in Egyptian culture. They are shepherds. They're keepers of livestock. To Egyptian nobility, they are considered unclean. The passage says that they are considered to be, among the Egyptians, they are an abomination. They've arrived in Egypt. They're going to live. That's good. But they are coming in at the lowest rung on the ladder. The wealth of Jacob that had made him respectable and even enviable in Canaan didn't mean much at all here. They, as far as the Egyptians were concerned, were a bunch of low-life rednecks in this place. And that's why Joseph tries to convince them not to emphasize the fact that they are shepherds when they present themselves to Pharaoh. So with culture shock hitting hard, we can imagine also that Jacob probably had this question on his heart, the next blank on your sheet. Is God present and working in these circumstances? Is this what God wanted? For his people to be looked down upon and called an abomination? Is God really calling them to a place where they're going to be scorned? Will God build them as a nation from the very bottom of society? These are legitimate questions. And you, no doubt, have been in many different circumstances in your life in which you have wondered the same thing. You very likely had various times in your life, sometimes very extended, very long periods of your life, where you repeatedly thought to yourself, this is not how I thought my life was going to go. This was not the plan. Things are worse than I could have imagined. And so you may ask, is God actually with me in this circumstance? Does he even care? Is God working even right now through what's happening to me? Those questions cross our minds, and they're certainly crossing the mind of Jacob as all of this unfolded. Look back at the passage once more, Genesis 47, verses 1 to 6. It says, So Joseph went in and told Pharaoh, My father and my brothers, with their flocks and herds and all that they possess, have come from the land of Canaan. They are now in the land of Goshen. And from among his brothers he took 5 men and presented them to Pharaoh. Pharaoh said to his brothers, What is your occupation? And they said to Pharaoh, Your servants are shepherds, as our fathers were. They said to Pharaoh, We've come to sojourn in the land, for there is no pasture for your servants' flocks, for the famine is severe in the land of Canaan. And now, please, let your servants dwell in the land of Goshen. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, Your father and your brothers have come to you. The land of Egypt is before you. Settle your father and your brothers in the best of the land. Let them settle in the land of Goshen. And if you know any able men among them, put them in charge of my livestock. So Pharaoh welcomes Jacob's family, and not only is he willing to let them into the land of Goshen, but he actually gives them more responsibility. They're going to be in charge of Pharaoh's personal livestock too. That's how much of an impression that Joseph has had on Pharaoh. If his family members are half as good at managing things as Joseph is, then this will be a great benefit to Pharaoh. And again, think once more of Jacob and the other sons. They've made this big change. They've arrived in this new place. There's a lot to think about and adjust to and take in all at once. But pretty quickly, they are told to settle. Get comfortable. Get back to your normal routine. Settle in the land. Do what you always do. You're farm people. So farm. Start shepherding and tending herds again. Do just like you've always done. Now, this also has to feel unusual and kind of confusing to Jacob. Isn't God supposed to be making them into a great nation? With this big move, shouldn't they see some change, some kind of development as God works? Why are things so weirdly normal? So the question that was likely on Jacob's mind was this: is God present and working in my normal, mundane living? They've settled. They're doing the same old stuff. Nothing much is happening. So sure, they're in Egypt, but they are right back in the shepherding routine. They wake up, they feed animals, they tend flocks. They don't feel that different. So how can they know that God is doing something when it feels like nothing is happening? And again, I'm quite sure that at times in your life you have felt the same way. Sometimes life is just life. Sometimes nothing is exciting is happening to you. Sometimes it doesn't feel like God is growing you or changing your circumstances. The truth is, sometimes you're just doing the same old stuff. Is God really present and working in your mundane living? Is he really with you when it seems like nothing much is happening? That question plagued Jacob, and it plagues us as well. Let's finish off for this morning, Genesis 47, verses 7 to 12. It says, Then Joseph brought in Jacob his father and stood him before Pharaoh, and Jacob blessed Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said to Jacob, How many are the days of the years of your life? And Jacob said to Pharaoh, The days of the years of my sojourning are 130 years. Few and evil have been the days of the years of my life, and they have not attained to the days of the years of the life of my fathers and the days of their sojourning. And Jacob blessed Pharaoh and went out from the presence of Pharaoh. Then Joseph settled his father and his brothers and gave them a possession in the land of Egypt, in the best of the land, in the land of Ramses, as Pharaoh had commanded. And Joseph provided his father, his brothers, and all his father's household with food according to the number of their dependents. So here Jacob gets to meet Pharaoh personally, which I'm sure was pretty intimidating for him. Pharaoh is really impressed with this old man, and he asks him his age. And Jacob responds in a really humble way. He says he's 130 years old, and then he added there, he said, Few and evil have been the days of the years of my life, and they have not attained to the days of the years of the life of my fathers. So what he's saying is, I've lived a long time, but not long enough to accomplish as much as those who came before me. I've had a long life, but I don't have much to show for it. I've been around a really long time, and yet here I am begging you for help. You see, Jacob desperately wanted the same thing that his father Isaac wanted. Jacob desperately wanted the same thing that his grandfather Abraham wanted. He desperately wanted to see God's promises fulfilled. And yet here he is, near the very end of his life, waiting. So I think we could imagine that Jacob is wondering this in his heart. The last question on your sheet is God present and working after all this time? He's lived a long time, but not long enough to see the good that God has for him. He's waited a very long time. Of course, he may be led to doubt that God is actually with him, that God is actually doing something after all this time, after all these years. And again, I'm sure that many of you have felt this way before as well. I know you believe in the Lord. You want to trust him. You want to see him work in your life. But many of you have been waiting and waiting and waiting. And so you wonder, God, are you still doing anything? God, are you still present with me? Is anything going to happen? It's been so long. Are you present and working in my life after all of this time? All of these questions probably circulated in Jacob's mind. Is God present and working in this place, with these people, in these circumstances, in my normal everyday living after all this time? And as we read this narrative of the Old Testament, knowing where it leads, hopefully you, as a believer in the entirety of the Bible, can know that the answer is absolutely yes. Even when it seems like he's not, God is present and he is working. In the story of Jacob, yes, God was with him. Yes, God was working in that place with those people, in those circumstances, every moment of every day, in the very long term. Yes, the words that God spoke to him at the outset of this passage remained true. God had told him, do not be afraid. I am with you. I am working to fulfill my purposes. You will have peace. And you, as a normal believer, trying to follow Jesus in our modern world, should grow to be comfortable with this answer as well. Brothers and sisters, believe this. When all those questions cross your mind and weigh heavily on your heart, the answer is yes. God is present and working in your life. Where you are, with the people around you, in your circumstances, in your normal living, over the long period of time. As we open our service with this morning, Romans 8:28, which you all know, tells us this. And we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to his purpose. Now, there's a lot for us to unpack in that verse, and we're going to return to that same verse in just a couple of weeks. But for right now, I want you to simply highlight two words in that passage, and that is all things. If you love God, if you've repented of your sin and trusted in the finished work of Jesus Christ on the cross, then you are called according to his purposes. You are one of the people that this verse is talking about. And for you, God is working all things together for good. All things at all times. When we have the same questions that Jacob likely had, we know the answer is absolutely yes. God is working all things in my life for good. Wherever I am, whoever I'm around, whatever my circumstances are, even when things seem normal and boring, and even when I feel like I've been waiting forever, for those who love God, he is constantly, persistently, endlessly working all things for good. So when those questions cross your mind, simply remind yourself, yes, I should not fear. Yes, he is with me. Yes, he is working. He's working all things for good. Let's pray as we close for today. God, we can be most confident in your presence with us and in your work among us because of who Jesus is. We can know these things for sure because Jesus Christ has shown himself as being God with us. He came to be present with us in a way that is unique and new, and we can know him. We have salvation in him and him alone, that he is our King of kings. And because of who Jesus is and because of what he's done, we can know and trust that Romans 8:28 is true, that God has an eternal plan. We see it fulfilled in Jesus Christ, and we want to see it continue to be fulfilled in every aspect of our lives. So God, help us to trust in this mighty King that is able to work all things for good. Help us to believe it even when the questions cross our minds. Help us to be confident in us even when we feel afraid or unsure. Help us to know for sure that our God is at work in all things. In your name we pray, amen.